She opened the door to someone she knew. Minutes later, her face was unrecognizable. This wasn't a burglary. Nothing valuable was taken, but something was destroyed deliberately. Her marriage, her identity, her future. And the person responsible helped investigate the crime. For 23 years, she got away with it. This is the murder of Sherri Rasmussen, and this story was almost buried. Sherri Rasmussen was not reckless. She wasn't involved in crime. She wasn't surrounded by danger. She was a nurse, newly married, building a future. Her life looked stable, predictable, safe. That's what makes what happened next so disturbing, because the danger didn't come from outside. It came from someone already connected to her life. Before Sherri married John Rutan, there was another woman, Stephanie Lazarus, an ex-girlfriend who didn't take rejection lightly. Their relationship had been intense, on again, off again, the kind that never fully ends, even when it's over. When John chose Sherri, Stephanie didn't explode publicly. She didn't beg, she didn't threaten, she stayed quiet. And sometimes, quiet is worse. There's something else you need to know. Stephanie wasn't just an ex, she was a police officer. She understood crime scenes, she understood procedure, she understood how investigators think, and she understood something critical. If you shape the story early enough, people stop looking deeper. On February 24, 1986, Sherri was home alone. No forced entry, no broken windows, no smashed locks. That means she either knew the person at her door or trusted them. Inside that house, there was a struggle, a violent one. Sherri fought back. This wasn't quick, this wasn't impulsive, it was sustained, personal. Her injuries showed repeated blows, far beyond what was necessary to silence someone. This wasn't about theft, it was about rage. And when the beating stopped, a gun was raised. One shot, silence. When police arrived, they saw what they expected to see: open drawers, scattered jewelry, a burglary narrative. And once that label was applied, the deeper questions stopped. But burglaries don't usually involve that kind of fury. They don't stay long enough to destroy someone, and they don't usually involve someone who knows exactly how investigations work. The chilling detail? The person who committed the crime didn't run. She attended the funeral. She comforted the husband. She remained inside law enforcement. And for 23 years, no one questioned her. They called it a burglary, and once they said it out loud, it became truth. Drawers were open, jewelry scattered. The house looked disturbed just enough. But look closer. Nothing of real value was gone. No frantic destruction, no rushed escape. Just a staged story placed carefully over violence that didn't fit. Because burglars steal, they don't stay long enough to beat someone with that kind of fury. They don't return to fire a single controlled shot. This wasn't panic, it was punishment. And here's what makes it worse. The person who did it understood exactly how police think, because she was one of them. Stephanie Lazarus didn't panic after the murder. She didn't disappear. She didn't relocate. She stayed, calm, present, invisible. She attended Sherri's funeral. She stood near the grieving husband. She spoke gently, offered comfort. Imagine that, standing in a room full of mourners, knowing you caused the grief. That kind of composure doesn't come from shock. It comes from certainty. Certainty that no one is looking at you. And no one was. Investigators accepted the burglary theory quickly, too quickly. Sherri's injuries were severe, deeply personal, but the label burglary closed the emotional door. Once a case feels random, it stops feeling solvable. And once it feels random, no one searches for motive. Years passed. Stephanie built her career inside the LAPD. Promotions, reputation, authority. She arrested suspects, interviewed criminals, walked through crime scenes, all while knowing she had once staged one herself. For 23 years, the lie held, because it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy, it was quiet, and quiet lies survive longer. But something small had been preserved,
something almost forgotten, a bite mark. At the time, it meant little. DNA testing in 1986 wasn't what it would become, so the evidence sat, waiting. Decades later, cold case detectives reopened the file. Technology had evolved. What once seemed insignificant was now undeniable. DNA doesn't care about time.
It doesn't care about uniforms. It doesn't care about reputation. It matches. And when they ran the test, the result didn't point to a stranger. It didn't point to a burglar. It pointed to Stephanie Lazarus, a police officer, a colleague, a woman who had stood inside the system for over 2 decades. When investigators brought her in for questioning, she didn't look afraid. She smiled. She joked lightly. She treated it like a misunderstanding. That's what happens when you believe you've outsmarted time. But this time was different. This time the evidence wasn't theory, it was biology. And biology doesn't negotiate. As the questioning continued, something shifted. Her answers slowed, her tone tightened, the confidence thinned. Because for the first time in 23 years, the story was no longer hers to control. The lie that had protected her for decades was beginning to collapse. And when it falls, it doesn't fall quietly. For 23 years, she lived normally. That might be the most disturbing part. She woke up, put on her uniform, went to work. She interviewed suspects. She analyzed crime scenes. She asked other people why they did what they did. And never once did anyone ask her. Because she was trusted. Because she was one of them. Because the lie was clean. But lies built on confidence don't expect science to catch up. When detectives brought Stephanie Lazarus into the interview room in 2009, she didn't look like someone cornered. She looked relaxed, almost entertained. She smiled when she sat down, made small talk, answered questions casually. Her posture said, "This is routine." The investigators didn't accuse her immediately. They let her talk. They asked about John, about the past, about old relationships. Her voice stayed steady, light, dismissive. She minimized everything. "Oh, that was so long ago. We weren't that serious. I barely remember." But memory has edges, and when detectives placed the DNA results on the table, something subtle shifted. Not panic, not yet, just stillness. They explained the bite mark. They explained the match. They explained that her DNA was found on Sherri Rasmussen's body. Her smile flickered, just for a second, and in that second, you could see it. The calculation, the scrambling, the realization that this wasn't speculation, it wasn't rumor, it wasn't theory. It was evidence that didn't require belief, it required explanation. She tried. She suggested contamination. She suggested coincidence. She suggested impossibility. But every answer sounded thinner than the last. Her pauses grew longer. Her eyes shifted more often. The confidence that carried her for 2 decades began to erode, not in a dramatic collapse, but in quiet fractures. Because when someone has controlled the narrative for that long, losing it feels unreal. And that's what was happening. She was no longer the investigator. She was the subject. No badge, no authority, no shield. Just a woman in a chair, confronted with something she couldn't outthink. Detectives didn't raise their voices. They didn't threaten. They didn't rush. They let silence do the work. Silence is uncomfortable when you're hiding something. It stretches, it presses, it forces you to sit with what you've done. And for the first time in 23 years, Stephanie Lazarus had nowhere to redirect the story. When the interview ended, she wasn't defiant, she wasn't explosive, she was smaller, controlled, but tight. The composure was still there, but it was forced now, because the truth had surfaced, and once it surfaces, it doesn't go back under. Her arrest shocked the department. Colleagues who had trusted her, worked beside her, believed in her. But the real shock wasn't that she was capable of violence, it was that she had been capable of living with it, day after day, year after year, attending the funeral, comforting the husband, wearing the badge, and never breaking, until science broke it for her. In 2012, Stephanie Lazarus was convicted of first-degree murder, 27 years to life. The uniform was gone, the title was gone, the control was gone. Sherri Rasmussen didn't get those 23 years back. She didn't get the future she believed she was building. She didn't get to watch time work in her favor. But time did something else. It waited. And when it finally moved, it moved quietly, through a lab result, through a courtroom, through a verdict that couldn't be undone. Sherri trusted love. Stephanie trusted time. Time almost protected her. Almost. Sometimes monsters don't look like monsters. They look like friends.